Silence isn't empty. It's doing something inside your mind right now that most people never notice. On Relaxing Facts Studio, we explore the hidden systems shaping how you think, feel, and focus without you even realizing it. In this episode, we uncover what actually happens when noise fades away and your brain is left alone with itself. From memory replay to attention reset, silence reveals a side of human cognition that constant sound normally hides. Stay with us as we break down how quiet environments reshape awareness, and why your mind never truly stops working, even when everything around you does. Cars move past your window long after midnight, while phones vibrate, televisions play in nearby rooms, and notifications interrupt moments that once stayed quiet. The human brain rarely experiences true silence anymore. For most of human history, natural environments operated very differently, with sound appearing in short, meaningful bursts like rainfall, animal movement, or distant thunder. Early human attention evolved inside those slower soundscapes because the brain needed periods of low stimulation to recover cognitive energy between threats. That recovery process still affects modern neural systems today, especially inside the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, focus, and decision-making efficiency. That planning system begins to weaken when sound never fully stops, because the brain treats unpredictable background noise as information requiring continuous monitoring. Traffic, message alerts, and overlapping media streams force attention to switch repeatedly, even when people believe they are ignoring them. Neuroscientists call this partial attention shifting, and it increases cognitive load across the working memory system. Researchers studying urban noise exposure found that persistent environmental sound can elevate cortisol production, the body's primary stress response hormone, even during passive activities like reading or eating. The brain interprets unresolved sensory input as unfinished environmental uncertainty, which keeps low-level vigilance active longer than necessary. Natural environments usually separate important sounds from background silence, allowing the nervous system to identify threats efficiently without exhausting attention reserves. Modern cities reverse that balance completely. Instead of occasional stimulation surrounded by quiet, people now experience continuous stimulation interrupted by only brief moments of silence. A prehistoric campsite at night might contain minutes of near-total quiet between detectable sounds, while a modern apartment near traffic can maintain constant low-frequency noise above 50 decibels for hours. That continuous sensory pressure changes how attention systems prioritize information and recover from mental effort. That reduced recovery time affects more than concentration because mental organization depends on moments when external input temporarily decreases. During structured quiet, the brain begins reorganizing competing information streams, filtering irrelevant details, and stabilizing decision-making patterns. Brain imaging studies show that quieter environments can reduce excessive activity inside the amygdala, a region strongly connected to stress processing and emotional alertness. This does not mean humans require perfect silence to function well. The brain simply evolved around rhythmic cycles of stimulation and recovery, and modern environments increasingly remove the recovery half of that biological pattern. Videos switch every few seconds, notifications arrive before conversations fully end, and background audio follows people from morning until sleep. Attention rarely stays on one task for long anymore. Modern digital platforms compete aggressively for human focus because advertising systems reward engagement time, not sustained concentration. As a result, the brain adapts to rapid sensory shifts instead of stable mental effort. Researchers studying media multitasking found that constant task switching weakens the brain's ability to filter irrelevant information, especially during cognitively demanding activities like reading, planning, or problem solving. That filtering problem grows worse when multiple sound sources overlap throughout the day, because the brain continues processing background audio even during unrelated tasks. Music, conversations, traffic noise, and alerts all compete inside working memory simultaneously. Neuroscientists describe this as auditory multitasking, and it increases cognitive fatigue by forcing attention systems to repeatedly reorganize incoming sensory data. Even brief interruptions can disrupt concentration stability for several minutes because the prefrontal cortex must reconstruct the previous mental context after each distraction. In busy environments, that reconstruction process happens continuously, often without conscious awareness. Earlier human environments contained fewer competing signals, allowing attention to remain fixed on single survival-related tasks for longer periods. Modern systems operate differently. Instead of rewarding sustained focus, digital platforms encourage rapid engagement bursts driven by novelty, emotional stimulation, and unpredictable rewards. Dopamine signaling increases more strongly when rewards arrive inconsistently, which is the same reinforcement mechanism observed in gambling systems. Endless scrolling, variable notifications, and autoplay media exploit that response pattern, training the brain to expect constant stimulation even during quiet moments. The average smartphone user now checks their device dozens of times daily, while some studies place total digital interactions in the thousands, including taps, swipes, and notifications. That level of interruption would have been biologically unimaginable for most of human history. The cognitive system evolved to manage occasional environmental changes, not continuous streams of competing information arriving every few seconds. Open conversations, message alerts, keyboard sounds, and visual media create layered sensory environments that continuously drain attentional resources across the day. That constant stimulation changes how silence feels internally because overstimulated brains begin treating quietness as missing input rather than recovery time. Many people now reach for music, videos, or phones within seconds of silence appearing. The nervous system starts craving stimulation loops it has been repeatedly trained to expect. Studies on deep focus training show that reducing interruption frequency, limiting background noise, and protecting uninterrupted work periods can strengthen sustained concentration over time, allowing cognitive systems to stabilize again under quieter conditions. A quiet room can suddenly fill with old conversations, familiar music, or memories that seemed completely forgotten for years. The brain rarely stays inactive during silence. When external sensory input decreases, neural systems begin searching for internal information to maintain cognitive activity and environmental prediction. This is partly controlled by the default mode network, a large brain system associated with memory integration, self-reflection, and internal mental simulation. Brain imaging studies show that internal thought processes often increase when outside stimulation becomes limited, especially during prolonged quiet environments. That internal activity tends to prioritize emotionally intense memories because the brain stores emotionally significant experiences differently from ordinary daily information. Fear, embarrassment, excitement, and grief activate stronger encoding processes inside the amygdala and hippocampus, two systems deeply involved in emotional memory formation and long-term recall. A random conversation from years ago may disappear completely, while a stressful argument or meaningful life event can remain neurologically accessible for decades. During silence, the brain often revisits those stronger emotional records first because they carry higher predictive value for future decision-making and survival assessment. External noise usually interrupts internal replay by continuously feeding the brain new sensory information that competes for attention. Silence removes much of that competition. Instead of processing traffic, notifications, or conversations, the nervous system redirects more resources toward internally stored patterns, including remembered voices, melodies, and unfinished emotional experiences. Neuroscientists describe this process through predictive processing, a mechanism where the brain continuously generates expectations based on previous sensory experiences. Familiar songs can replay internally with accurate rhythm and timing because neural pathways preserve fragments of earlier auditory input like compressed recordings. That reconstruction ability operates across enormous neural networks containing billions of interconnected synapses. A single familiar voice may activate distributed regions responsible for language, emotional association, sound recognition, and autobiographical memory simultaneously. The process resembles a vast archive system rebuilding incomplete files from stored fragments rather than replaying exact recordings. Even small sensory triggers like silence, darkness, or a distant sound can reactivate entire emotional contexts connected to earlier experiences. That constant internal replay reveals something important about human consciousness because the brain never fully stops generating interpretations, predictions, and remembered experiences. Silence does not create mental activity from nothing. It exposes activity that was already operating beneath louder external stimulation. This is why silence can feel calming for some people yet uncomfortable for others, depending on which internal memories and emotional patterns become most accessible when external noise finally disappears. A person entering the quietest rooms on Earth often notices something unexpected within seconds. Their own body suddenly sounds loud. Breathing becomes obvious. Heartbeats feel amplified. Even subtle joint movements can seem unnaturally sharp inside the space. These rooms are called anechoic chambers, specialized environments engineered to absorb nearly all reflected sound waves using dense acoustic wedges built into the walls, ceiling, and floor. In normal environments, sound reflects constantly from surrounding surfaces, helping the brain estimate distance, orientation, and physical space through a process called spatial hearing. That orientation system begins struggling when reflections disappear because the nervous system depends heavily on environmental echoes to stabilize perception. Inside an anechoic chamber, sound absorption can exceed 99% across large frequency ranges, reducing ambient noise levels below negative decibels in some facilities. The room becomes quieter than most natural environments humans ever experience. Blood circulation, swallowing, breathing airflow, and faint muscular movement become detectable because the brain increases sensory sensitivity when environmental reference points vanish. Neuroscientists describe part of this adjustment as neural gain control, where the nervous system amplifies weaker signals when stronger external input disappears. Ordinary rooms continuously provide subtle sensory confirmation through echoes, vibration, air movement, and distant environmental sound. Anechoic chambers remove most of those stabilizing references simultaneously. Instead of helping orientation, silence begins interfering with it. Some people report dizziness, time distortion, or difficulty balancing after extended exposure because the auditory system contributes significantly to spatial awareness alongside vision and the vestibular system inside the inner ear. The Quietest certified chambers measure ambient sound levels lower than a calm human breathing cycle at close distance. In practical terms, the room can become quieter than forests at night, isolated deserts, or deep snowfall environments. Even tiny biological sounds that normally disappear beneath background noise suddenly dominate conscious perception. For many people, remaining inside these environments for long periods becomes mentally exhausting because the brain evolved around continuous low-level sensory feedback from the outside world. That discomfort reveals an important biological limitation because human perception depends less on perfect silence than on stable sensory orientation. The nervous system constantly compares internal and external signals to maintain spatial awareness and cognitive stability. Rather than creating peace automatically, extreme quiet can expose how strongly the human brain relies on environmental input to organize perception, maintain balance, and continuously confirm physical reality. A completely quiet room can still seem filled with faint music, remembered voices, or sounds that never physically occurred. The brain continues predicting sensory input even when external sound disappears. Human perception works partly through anticipation because the nervous system constantly estimates what should happen next based on previous experiences and environmental patterns. Neuroscientists describe this predictive process as Bayesian inference, where the brain combines stored expectations with incoming sensory data to interpret reality efficiently under uncertain conditions. That prediction system becomes more noticeable during silence because external sound no longer competes strongly with internally generated patterns. Familiar songs, repeated phrases, and recognizable voices can reappear mentally because the brain reconstructs fragments of earlier auditory experiences from stored neural activity. This process depends heavily on auditory memory networks distributed across the temporal lobes and association cortex. Studies using brain imaging show that imagining familiar music can activate regions similar to those involved during real listening, including areas responsible for rhythm recognition and sound pattern processing. Normal environments constantly update perception with fresh sensory information that corrects internal predictions automatically. Silence weakens that correction process. Instead of relying primarily on external confirmation, the brain leans more heavily on expectation, memory, and probability-based interpretation to maintain perceptual continuity. A distant pipe vibration, air movement, or electrical hum may seem amplified because the nervous system increases sensory sensitivity under low stimulation conditions. Researchers call this adjustment neural gain control, a mechanism that boosts weak signals when overall input levels decline. That amplification process operates across billions of neurons exchanging electrochemical signals continuously throughout the auditory system. The brain filters enormous amounts of sensory data every second, selecting only a small portion for conscious awareness. In quiet environments, reduced competition allows previously ignored signals to rise closer to conscious perception. Subtle internal noises like breathing airflow or blood circulation, normally masked beneath environmental sound, become easier for the brain to detect and interpret consciously. That blending of memory, expectation, and sensory interpretation reveals how perception functions less like passive recording and more like active construction. The brain does not simply receive reality exactly as it exists externally. It continuously builds the most probable version of reality from incomplete information. This is why imagined sounds during quiet moments can sometimes feel vivid or emotionally convincing even when no external source exists in the surrounding environment. Thank you for watching until the end. If this episode helped you see silence in the mind in a new way, consider subscribing to Relaxing Facts Studio so you don't miss upcoming documentaries. Like the video to help it reach a wider audience, and share it on your social media so others can experience it too. Your engagement truly shapes how far these ideas travel. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, reflections, or anything the video made you notice about your own attention and silence. Your support is essential for the channel's growth and continued production of these episodes.